In a bustling coffee shop, a waitress's note on a receipt ignites a story of love, secrets, and second chances. Melissa, pouring kindness into every cup, doesn't know James, the quiet man at table 9, is a CEO concealing his truth. A shy confession spirals into heartfelt messages, a shattering betrayal, and a rain-drenched plea for forgiveness. As Paulo Coelho once said, "When you want something, all the universe conspires in helping you to achieve it." Will the universe guide them back together? Stay tuned to uncover the magic of their journey. If this tale warms your heart, please subscribe and share where you're listening from. Your hometown might spark our next story. Wondering what words Melissa wrote to change everything? Keep listening to unravel this soul-stirring love story. The Maple Hill Cafe buzzed with the morning hum of clinking mugs and murmured orders, its air thick with the scent of roasted beans and fresh pastries. Behind the counter, Melissa moved with practiced grace, her hands deftly wiping down the polished wood, though her eyes flickered toward the glass door every few seconds. Her apron, slightly frayed at the edges, hung loosely over her faded jeans, and a stray lock of chestnut hair escaped her loose bun, brushing her cheek. She tucked it back, her fingers lingering as if to steady herself. Today felt different, heavier, like the air before a storm. "All right, listen," she whispered to Lily, her coworker, who was stacking clean mugs on a tray nearby. Her voice was low, conspiratorial, barely audible over the hiss of the espresso machine. "If he comes in today, I swear I'm writing a note on his receipt. No chickening out this time." Her words carried a mix of defiance and nerves, as if she were trying to convince herself as much as Lily. Lily, her dark curls bouncing as she turned, shot Melissa a grin that was equal parts mischief and skepticism. "You say that every Tuesday, Mel. But when Mr. Mysterious shows up, you freeze like a kitten in a thunderstorm." She balanced the tray with one hand, her other pointing a teasing finger. "Bet you'll just blush and hand him his coffee like always." Melissa rolled her eyes, but her cheeks flushed a soft pink, betraying her. "Not today," she insisted, her voice firmer now. "He's been coming every Tuesday for weeks. Always table 9, always black coffee, no sugar. Same quiet vibe, same, I don't know, energy. It's like he sees everything but says nothing. I'm doing it, Lil. Just a small note to let him know I notice him." Lily chuckled, her eyes sparkling. "Big talk, Braveheart. I dare you. No backing out." She nudged Melissa's shoulder before gliding toward the kitchen, leaving her alone with her racing thoughts. Melissa's fingers tightened around the damp rag, her pulse quickening. She didn't dare admit how much those Tuesday mornings had started to mean. The man at table 9, James, though she didn't know his name yet, had become a quiet anchor in her chaotic world. Between juggling shifts to support her younger brother Noah and burying her dreams of interior design, those fleeting moments when their eyes met felt like a pause, a breath. His steady gaze, never impatient, never dismissive, made her feel seen in a job that often rendered her invisible. As if summoned by her resolve, the bell above the door chimed, a soft, silvery sound that cut through the cafe's din. Melissa froze, her breath catching. Lily, emerging from the kitchen, glanced over and mouthed, "Speak of the devil," her eyes wide with delight. There he was. James stepped inside, his presence commanding yet understated, like a shadow that somehow drew light. He wore a charcoal gray button-up, sleeves rolled just past his forearms, revealing a simple leather watch that glinted faintly. His dark jeans fit perfectly, and his hair, a shade of chestnut not unlike Melissa's, was slightly tousled, as if he'd run his fingers through it moments before. He didn't scan the room, didn't pause to take in the chatter or the aroma. He simply walked to table 9, his table, as if it had been reserved for him alone. Melissa's heart thudded, a wild rhythm against her ribs. Her hands, still clutching the rag, felt clammy. "That's your cue," Lily teased, passing behind her with a tray of pastries, her voice a conspiratorial whisper. "Don't choke now." Swallowing hard, Melissa grabbed her order pad, smoothing her apron as if it could steady her nerves. She crossed the floor, her sneakers silent against the worn wood, and stopped at his table. "Hi, welcome back," she said, her smile brighter than she intended. "The usual." James looked up, his eyes meeting hers for a brief, electric moment. They were hazel, flecked with gold, and held a quiet intensity that made her stomach flip. "Yes, please," he said, his voice low and even, with a warmth that lingered. He nodded once, then returned to the newspaper folded neatly beside him. "Coming right up," Melissa replied, turning back toward the counter. Her legs felt unsteady, as if the floor had tilted beneath her. She busied herself with the order, grinding beans and steaming milk for other customers, but her mind was a whirlwind. The pen in her apron pocket seemed to burn, urging her to act. Lily, catching her eye from across the counter, raised an eyebrow, her silent challenge clear. When the coffee was ready, a perfect black pour, no sugar, Melissa placed the cup on a small tray. She pulled the receipt from the printer, her fingers trembling slightly. This was it, no turning back. With a deep breath, she flipped the paper over and scribbled, her handwriting small but deliberate. "You make this place warmer. Ever thought of talking to your waitress?" She stared at the words, her heart pounding. Too bold, too forward, but something in her, some spark of courage, refused to erase them. She folded the receipt neatly beneath the saucer, her movements precise, as if handling something fragile. Carrying the tray to table 9, she set it down gently, the ceramic clinking softly. "Here you go," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Thanks," James replied, glancing up. Their eyes locked again, and for a fleeting second, something softer flickered in his expression. A curiosity, perhaps, or recognition. Melissa turned away quickly, forcing herself not to linger, her pulse erratic as she retreated to the counter. Lily pounced the moment she reached the key. "You did it, didn't you?" she whispered, her eyes gleaming. "Tell me you wrote it." Melissa nodded, pressing her lips together to suppress a nervous laugh. "I did. I might die, but I did." From the corner of her eye, she watched James unfold the receipt. His fingers paused, his gaze lingering on her words. He didn't smile, didn't look around. He simply read, his expression unreadable, as if the note were a puzzle he hadn't expected. Then, reaching into his wallet, he pulled out several bills, a tip far more generous than the cost of his coffee. He stood, adjusted the cuffs of his shirt with a quiet precision, and walked toward the door. The bell chimed as he left, the sound sharp in Melissa's ears. She exhaled, her shoulders sagging. No reaction, no acknowledgement, just silence. Disappointment curled in her chest, heavy and cold. "Well, that's that," she muttered, turning to wipe the counter again, though it gleamed under the morning light. What Melissa didn't see was James outside, pausing on the sidewalk. His calm exterior cracked, a rare, unguarded smile breaking across his face. He glanced back at the cafe, the receipt still clutched in his hand, her words echoing in his mind. "You make this place warmer." For the first time in years, James Carter, CEO of Brew & Coffee, felt something shift. A spark, a possibility. He slipped the receipt into his pocket, his steps lighter as he disappeared into the city's morning rush, unaware that those words had just set their story in motion. The Tuesday after Melissa's bold note, the Maple Hill Cafe felt quieter, as if the world held its breath. Melissa stood behind the counter, her hands busy polishing a row of mugs, but her mind lingered on the receipt she'd left for the man at table 9. She hadn't seen him react, hadn't caught a glance or a word, just the empty table and a generous tip that felt like a polite dismissal. Her heart, bruised by her own daring, whispered that she'd been foolish, yet a stubborn spark of hope kept her eyes darting to the door. Lily, wiping down a nearby table, noticed her friend's distraction. "Still mooning over Mr. Mysterious?" she teased, her voice light but kind. "You've been checking that door like it's about to spit out a winning lottery ticket." Melissa managed a half smile, tucking a stray lock of hair behind her ear. "I don't know, Lil. Maybe I scared him off. Who writes a note like that to a stranger?" she sighed, her fingers tightening around the rag. "It's just... he's different. He doesn't rush, doesn't snap when the line's long. It's like he sees me," Lily smirked, tossing her rag over her shoulder. "Well, if he doesn't show today, you'll survive. But if he does, you better not hide in the kitchen." She winked before heading to greet a customer, leaving Melissa to her thoughts. The bell above the door chimed at exactly 8:17 a.m., and Melissa's breath caught. James stepped inside, his presence as steady as ever, dressed in a navy sweater that hugged his frame and dark jeans that looked effortlessly sharp. His hair was slightly damp from the morning mist, and he carried the same quiet confidence, his hazel eyes scanning the room briefly before settling on table 9. Melissa's pulse quickened, a mix of relief and nerves flooding her chest. He hadn't been scared off. She approached his table, order pad in hand, her smile a touch shyer than usual. "Welcome back," she said, her voice steady despite the flutter in her stomach. "Black coffee, no sugar?" James looked up, his gaze lingering a beat longer than necessary. "Yes, please," he said, his tone warm, almost deliberate, as if testing the air between them. Melissa nodded and turned away, her cheeks warming. She didn't know that James, as he unfolded his newspaper, was replaying her note in his mind. "You make this place warmer." He hadn't planned to return so soon, but something about her words, her courage, had pulled him back. As the weeks passed, Tuesdays became Melissa's anchor. James arrived like clockwork, always at table 9, always the same order. But it was the small moments that began to weave a thread between them. One rainy morning, when the cafe was short-staffed and chaos reigned, Melissa dropped a tray of cups, the porcelain shattering across the floor. Mr. Dalton, the manager, stormed over, his voice sharp. "Watch it, Melissa! Break anything else and it's coming out of your paycheck!" Her hands shook as she knelt to gather the shards, her cheeks burning with shame. She glanced toward table 9, expecting James to look away, to bury himself in his paper like the other customers. Instead, he stood, his voice calm but firm. "It was an accident," he said, addressing Dalton directly. "I come here every week and the service is always flawless. She's the reason for that." The cafe fell silent, Dalton mumbling an apology before retreating. James sat down without another word, but to Melissa, his defense was a lifeline, a moment she tucked away like a pressed flower. Another Tuesday, late November's chill seeping through the cafe's windows. Melissa grazed her hand against a metal cart, leaving a thin, stinging scratch. She brushed it off, serving customers with her usual smile. When she cleared James's table later, he was gone, but in his place was a small box of antiseptic ointment and a folded napkin. Scrawled in neat handwriting were the words, "For the little hurts." "Take care." Melissa stood frozen, her throat tightening. She slipped the napkin into her pocket, later tucking it into the pages of her old sketchbook, where faded drawings of cozy rooms reminded her of dreams she'd set aside to raise Noah. These gestures, small but deliberate, made James more than a customer. He never rushed her, never checked his watch when the line slowed. When she passed his table, refilling water or clearing plates, his eyes followed her, not intrusively, but with a quiet attentiveness that made her feel like more than background noise. They'd barely spoken beyond orders, yet Melissa found herself fixing her hair in the espresso machine's reflection, her heart lifting each Tuesday morning. What she didn't know was why James kept returning. As CEO of Brewing Coffee, He visited branches undercover, blending in to observe operations. No name tag, no title, just a man with a coffee and a notebook. He'd noticed Melissa long before her note. Her warmth with regulars, the way she slipped extra napkins into an elderly woman's bag, her smile when she thought no one was watching. To him, she was the heartbeat of the cafe, a reminder of kindness in a world of boardrooms and bottom lines. Her note had been a spark, but it was her presence that kept him coming back, week after week, though he told himself it was just business. At home, Melissa's life was a balancing act. She shared a cramped apartment with Noah, her teenage brother, whose school fees and growing appetite stretched her paycheck thin. Her sketchbook, once filled with vibrant designs, now gathered dust, a relic of a life she'd paused when their parents died. The cafe was her lifeline, but it was also a cage, each shift a reminder of what she'd sacrificed. Yet James's quiet presence at Table 9 became a small rebellion, a reason to hope. She told herself it was just a crush, harmless, but when she caught herself sketching a cozy coffee shop in her rare free moments, she knew it was more. One Tuesday, as she set down his coffee, James spoke beyond his usual order. "You make this place feel like home," he said, his voice soft, his eyes steady. Melissa blinked, caught off guard, her smile faltering into something genuine. "Thanks," she murmured, retreating before her blush betrayed her. That night, alone in her room, she replayed his words, unaware that James, in his sleek city apartment, was staring at her folded receipt, wondering how a single sentence had cracked the walls he'd built around himself. The city lights glittered beyond James Carter's apartment window, casting a soft glow across the sleek furniture and the receipt that lay folded on his desk. Melissa's words, "You make this place warmer," had haunted him since that Tuesday at Maple Hill Cafe. Her courage, a quiet flame that refused to dim in his mind. Her voice, soft and unguarded, echoed from earlier that day. "You make this place feel like home." For a man accustomed to boardrooms and calculated decisions, those words felt like a breach in his armor, one he wasn't ready to seal. Yet, as CEO of Brew & Coffee, he knew approaching her as himself risked tainting whatever spark existed. So, under the cover of night, he made a choice that would change everything. He opened an old social media app on his phone, creating a profile for Nathan Rowe. The name was simple, untraceable, paired with a blurry photo of a coffee cup against a park bench. His bio read, "Just a guy who likes good coffee and better people." Hesitating only a moment, he found Melissa's profile, public, modest, filled with sunsets and napkin sketches of room designs. His thumb hovered, then tapped out a message. "Hi, I think you served me once at Maple Hill. Best coffee I've ever had." He hit send, his pulse quickening, and leaned back, the city's hum a distant murmur. Miles away, Melissa sat cross-legged on her worn couch, the apartment silent except for the faint hum of Noah's music from his room. Her phone buzzed, the notification catching her off guard. She frowned at the unfamiliar name, Nathan Rowe, but the message was polite, harmless. She clicked his profile. A few quotes, a park bench, nothing flashy. Cautious but curious, she typed back, "Thanks. I try to make every cup count." She set the phone down, expecting nothing more. But when another message arrived, "What's your favorite bean to brew?" she smiled, her guard softening. Their conversations began tentatively, like footsteps on a frozen lake. Nathan asked about her shifts, her favorite coffee blends, and whether she preferred the chaos of morning rushes or the calm of evening cleanups. Melissa answered sparingly at first, her responses clipped, but Nathan's warmth, never pushy, always attentive, drew her in. By the third night, she found herself waiting for his name to light up her screen, her fingers quick to reply. "Evening shifts are my favorite," she wrote. "It's quieter, like the world takes a breath." Nathan responded, "I bet you make those moments feel like home for everyone there." Melissa's cheeks warmed, her smile lingering as she typed. She didn't know Nathan was James, sitting in his high-rise office, his tie loosened, reading her words with a hunger he hadn't felt in years. Each message was a glimpse into her world, a world of small joys and heavy burdens. She shared fragments of her life, how she'd left design school to raise Noah after their parents' deaths, how she dreamed of creating spaces that felt like sanctuaries. "I used to sketch rooms that made people feel safe," she wrote one night, her vulnerability spilling onto the screen. "Now I just pour coffee and hope it's enough." James stared at the message, his chest tightening. He wanted to tell her she was enough, more than enough, but Nathan could only reply, "Your coffee does more than you think. It's like a little piece of that dream." He hated the lie, the mask of Nathan Rowe, but it let him see her, really see her, without the weight of his title. Yet each word he typed deepened the deception, a shadow he pushed to the back of his mind. Their chats grew longer, stretching past midnight. Melissa laughed at Nathan's quirky questions, ever tried coffee with cinnamon, and surprised herself by opening up. One night, emboldened by the safety of the screen, she wrote, "There's this guy at the cafe, comes every Tuesday, sits at table 9. He's quiet, polite, but I don't know. He makes me feel noticed." She hit send before she could overthink, her heart racing. James froze, his phone glowing in the dim light of his apartment. Table 9. That was him. She was talking about him. Joy surged through him, followed by a stab of guilt. He typed carefully, "He sounds lucky to have your attention." Melissa blushed, unaware that the man reading her words was the same one whose hazel eyes met hers every Tuesday, whose quiet defense and small gestures had already carved a place in her heart. For James, each message was a gift and a burden. Melissa was brighter, funnier, more resilient than he'd imagined. She shared stories of Noah's science fair triumphs, of nights she cried over bills, but smiled for her brother. He wanted to tell her everything, his name, his truth, but fear stopped him. What if she saw only the CEO, not the man who kept her napkin note in his desk drawer? So Nathan kept typing, saying things James was too afraid to voice. One night, Melissa wrote, "Sometimes I think I talk too much. Sorry if I ramble." James's fingers hovered, his heart aching. He wanted to say she could talk forever, that he'd never tire of her words. Instead, Nathan replied, "You don't ramble. You light up the dark." Melissa read the message in bed, her eyes misting. Nathan felt safe, real, like someone who saw her beyond the apron and the forced smiles. But James knew he was treading dangerous ground. The lie of Nathan Rowe was a fragile bridge, one that let him cross into her world but could collapse at any moment. He told himself it was harmless, a way to know her without the baggage of his life. Yet deep down, he feared the truth would shatter the trust they were building, word by word. As Melissa drifted to sleep, her phone glowing with Nathan's latest message, she smiled, unaware of the storm brewing. James, staring at the same words across town, felt his world tilt. He was falling, not as a CEO, but as a man hiding behind a name that didn't exist. And with every message, the weight of his secret grew heavier, threatening to unravel the fragile beauty of what they'd begun. The Maple Hill Cafe glowed softly under its warm lights. But for Melissa, the air felt brittle, as if one wrong move could shatter it. Her phone, tucked in her apron pocket, carried the weight of Nathan Rowe's latest message, sent just before her Thursday evening shift. "You make even the longest days feel lighter." She'd read it in the break room, a smile flickering across her face, her heart warmed by the stranger who'd become a quiet constant in her nights. Nathan's words, always thoughtful, always gentle, had woven a fragile thread of trust through her guarded heart. She didn't know that thread was about to snap. Behind the counter, Melissa poured espresso with mechanical precision. Her mind, half on Nathan, half on the man at table 9. James hadn't come this Tuesday, and the absence gnawed at her, though she wouldn't admit it to Lily, who was busy charming a group of regulars. Melissa told herself it was fine. James was just a customer, a crush she'd romanticized. Nathan, though, felt real, his messages a safe harbor in her storm of bills and dreams deferred. She glanced at her phone, tempted to reply, but the dinner rush kept her hands busy. As the clock ticked toward closing, the cafe settled into a lull, the hum of conversation fading. Melissa was wiping down the counter when her phone buzzed. She slipped it out, expecting another of Nathan's quirky questions. Instead, his message read, "Long day? Bet you still make table 9 feel like home every Tuesday." The words stopped her cold. Her fingers froze, the rag slipping from her hand. Table 9. Tuesday. She hadn't told Nathan about James, not specifically, only that vague mention of a quiet customer. How did he know the exact table, the exact day? Her breath quickened, a chill creeping up her spine. She reread the message, her mind racing. Had she slipped up, mentioned it in passing? But no, she was sure she hadn't. The cafe's light seemed too bright, the air too thin. She clicked Nathan's profile, scanning it with new eyes. The blurry coffee cup, the sparse posts, the carefully curated vagueness. It felt wrong now, staged. Her stomach twisted as she opened her laptop in the break room, her fingers trembling as she typed "Brewine Coffee CEO" into the search bar. The screen lit up with a photo of James Carter. Same hazel eyes, same steady posture, same quiet intensity she'd faced every Tuesday. Her heart plummeted, a sickening lurch. Nathan was James, the man who'd defended her, left her antiseptic for a scratch, and read her note on that receipt was the same man she'd bared her soul to online. He'd lied, crafted a persona to slip into her life, and every word she'd sent about Noah, her parents, her buried dreams, had been received by a stranger wearing a mask. The next morning, Melissa walked into the cafe with a face carved from stone. Her eyes, usually bright with warmth, were dull, shadowed by betrayal. Lily noticed immediately, nudging her as they prepped the counter. "You okay, Mel? You look like you saw a ghost." Melissa forced a nod, her voice flat. "Just tired." She couldn't tell Lily, not yet. The wound was too raw, too jagged. The bell chimed at 9:03 a.m., and the air shifted. James entered, but not as the quiet man in a sweater. He wore a tailored navy suit, a discreet pin on his lapel, flanked by 2 assistants clutching tablets. The staff straightened, Mr. Dalton hovering nervously nearby. Melissa's grip tightened on a coffee pot, her knuckles white. He wasn't her James, not Nathan, but James Carter, CEO, here to inspect his empire. She watched, detached, as he moved through the cafe, his voice calm but authoritative. He pointed out outdated procedures, questioned inventory logs, and addressed a customer complaint about slow service. At one point, he turned to Dalton, his tone measured. "Leadership isn't about rules. It's about making people want to stay, not fear leaving." The words, meant to reform, felt hollow to Melissa, like lines in a play. He'd been watching them all along, a silent observer, and she'd been a fool to think he'd seen her as anything more than a cog in his machine. When James's eyes met hers, she didn't flinch, but her gaze was ice, stripped of the warmth he'd once drawn out. He took a step toward her, his lips parting as if to speak, but she turned away, busying herself with a stack of napkins. Her chest ached, a storm of anger and hurt swirling inside. He'd read her fears, her hopes, her heart, and responded as a fiction. Every message, every late-night confession felt tainted now, a betrayal sharper than any she'd known. James hesitated, his hand twitching at his side, but his assistants ushered him to the next task. Melissa worked through her shift, her movements robotic, her smile a mask for the customers. When it ended, she sat in the break room, staring at her phone. James's last message glowed unread. "You make even the longest days feel lighter." She deleted it, her finger trembling, and typed a resignation letter on her laptop. She printed it, signed it with a shaking hand, and left it on Dalton's desk. The cafe, once her refuge, felt like a cage she could no longer bear. As she stepped into the evening air, the city's noise swallowed her. She didn't cry, not yet, but her heart folded in on itself, the trust she'd dared to build crumbling like ash. James, in his office across town, stared at his phone, Nathan's profile still open. He sensed the shift, the silence, and knew the truth had found her. The receipt, still in his drawer, felt heavier now, a reminder of a spark he might have extinguished with his own hands. The Maple Hill Cafe was a hollow shell of itself in Melissa's eyes, its once warm lights now stark, its chatter a dull roar. 3 days had passed since she'd left her resignation letter on Mr. Dalton's desk, her signature a trembling testament to the betrayal that had gutted her. James Carter, the man behind Nathan Rowe's messages, had unraveled her trust with a single lie, turning every late-night confession into a wound. She moved through her shifts like a ghost, her smile a brittle mask, her heart a locked door. Lily's concerned glances and gentle prods, "Mel, talk to me," met only silence. Melissa couldn't voice the ache, not when it felt like admitting she'd been a fool. Tuesday morning arrived, gray and humid, the air heavy with the promise of rain. Melissa stood behind the counter, polishing glasses that already gleamed, her hands moving out of habit. She'd agreed to work her notice period, but each minute felt like wading through wet cement. The bell above the door chimed, and her body tensed, a reflex born of habit. She didn't look up, expecting another regular, but the air shifted, a subtle charge like the moment before lightning. James stepped inside, alone. No suit, no assistance, just a light blue button-down and dark jeans, his hair slightly tousled, his hazel eyes searching. He didn't go to table 9. Instead, he sat at an empty stool by the counter, his hands folded, his presence a quiet plea. Melissa's grip on the glass tightened, her jaw clenching. She kept wiping, her movements deliberate as if ignoring him could erase the storm inside her. Lily, sensing the tension, hovered nearby but said nothing, her eyes darting between them. The cafe hummed with its usual rhythm, oblivious to the silent battle unfolding. James waited, his gaze fixed on Melissa, but she refused to meet it. Her heart pounded, a mix of anger and something softer, something she hated herself for feeling. He was the man who'd defended her, left her a note for a scratch, but also the one who'd slipped into her life as a lie. After a long minute, James stood and approached the counter, his steps slow, deliberate. He placed his hands gently on the edge, his voice low, almost a whisper. "Melissa," he said, "please, just 1 minute. Let me explain." Her hands stilled, the glass glinting under the cafe's lights. "I have nothing to say to you," she replied, her voice flat, though her throat tightened with unshed tears. She turned away, heading for the back exit, her sneakers thudding against the floor. She pushed through the kitchen, past the clatter of pans, and out into the alley behind the cafe. The sky opened up, rain pouring in sheets, soaking her within seconds. Her apron clung to her, her hair plastered to her face, but she didn't care. The cold matched the ache in her chest. "Why did it have to be him?" she whispered to the sky, her voice breaking. "Why did it have to be a lie?" Tears mingled with the rain, indistinguishable as she stood alone, the world blurring around her. Footsteps splashed behind her. She turned and there was James, drenched, his shirt clinging to his shoulders, his hair dark and dripping. He'd followed her, no umbrella, no jacket, just raw determination in his eyes. He reached her in 3 strides, catching her wrist gently, his touch warm against the chill. "Melissa, don't go," he said, his voice trembling, breathless. "Please, just this once, let me say it." She tried to pull away, but his grip, soft yet desperate, held her. "Let go," she snapped, her voice raw, but her feet stayed rooted, betraying her. "I never meant to hurt you," James said, rain streaming down his face. "I came to the cafe for work, yes, to watch how things ran. But I kept coming back because of you. Week after week, I sat at table 9 not to check inventories, but to see you smile, to watch you make strangers feel seen. You reminded me the world could still be kind." Melissa's lips quivered, her eyes burning. "You read my messages," she said, her voice rising. "I told you about my parents, about Noah, about nights I cried because I couldn't make ends meet. And you let me think you were someone else. Do you know how that feels?" She yanked her wrist free, stepping back, her chest heaving. "I trusted you, Nathan. Or whoever you are." "I'm still him," James said, stepping closer, his voice cracking. "I made that account because I was afraid. Afraid if you knew I was the CEO, you'd see the title, not me. I wanted you to know the man who felt alive because of your note. Because of you." He swallowed, his eyes glistening. "I was wrong. I know that. But every word I wrote was true. Every feeling was real." Melissa covered her mouth, a sob breaking free. "What hurts most," she whispered, "is I believed you. Every single word." Her shoulders shook, the rain hiding her tears but not her pain. James closed the distance, his arms wrapping around her, tentative at first, then firm, as if he'd waited a lifetime for this. "I'm not asking for forgiveness now," he murmured, his voice muffled against her wet hair. "I'm asking for a chance to prove it. With time, with everything I have. I don't want a world without you in it." The rain didn't stop, but Melissa didn't pull away. She stood in his embrace, soaked and shivering, her heart a battlefield of hurt and hope. She didn't speak, didn't promise, but she let him hold her, the warmth of his arms a fragile anchor in the storm. As they stood, the alley's gray walls blurring around them, neither knew what came next. But in that moment, under the relentless rain, a door had cracked open, just enough to let possibility slip through. The rain had stopped, but its echo lingered in Melissa's heart as she sat in James's car that night. Both of them soaked to the bone. The heater hummed softly, warming the silence between them. His words, "I'm asking for a chance to prove it," hung in the air, heavy with sincerity, yet fragile against her wounded trust. She hadn't forgiven him, not fully, but the warmth of his embrace in the alley had cracked something open, a sliver of possibility she wasn't ready to name. "I'm not promising anything," she said finally, her voice low, her eyes fixed on the dashboard. James nodded, his hands steady on the wheel. "I'll wait," he replied, soft but resolute. As he drove her home, the city lights blurred through the wet windshield, mirroring the uncertainty in her chest. Days passed, and James vanished from the Maple Hill Cafe. No table 9, no quiet orders, no hazel eyes catching hers across the counter. Melissa finished her notice period, her movements mechanical, her heart a tangle of relief and loss. Lily, sensing her friend's turmoil, tried to coax out the truth, but Melissa only shook her head. "It's complicated," she murmured, tying her apron for the last time. The cafe, once a refuge, now felt like a chapter she needed to close. Yet James's absence didn't mean he was gone. He was working quietly in ways she couldn't yet see. Across town, in his sleek office, James pored over reports, but his mind was elsewhere. Melissa's pain, her raw, trembling voice in the rain haunted him. He'd lied to protect himself, but the cost was her trust, and he'd spend a lifetime earning it back if he had to. He called his assistant, Caleb, his voice steady but urgent. "Find a design institute, the best one nearby. Set up a scholarship. Full tuition, materials, stipend. Anonymous. For a woman named Melissa, mid-20s, short brown hair." Caleb raised an eyebrow but nodded. "Not hiring her, sir?" he asked. James shook his head. "She's not for hire. She's someone who deserves her dreams." Weeks later, a letter arrived at Melissa's apartment, its crisp envelope unmarked. She opened it, expecting another bill, but found an offer: a full scholarship to the city's top design institute. No strings attached. Her breath caught, her fingers tracing the words. She'd abandoned design years ago, burying her sketches to raise Noah, but this felt like a lifeline to a life she'd thought lost. She called the institute, probing for details, but the administrator only said, "A donor believes in your talent." Melissa sat on her couch, the letter in her lap, suspicion tugging at her. James. It had to be him. But no calls came, no messages, no grand gestures claiming credit. Other changes followed, subtle but undeniable. The leaky bathroom in her apartment, a constant source of frustration, was fixed overnight. Her landlord shrugged when she asked, muttering, "Some guy said he owed your sister more than she'd ever know." Noah's next semester of school was suddenly covered by a local education grant. No explanation given. Melissa's burdens, once crushing, began to lift, not with fanfare but with a quiet grace that felt strangely familiar. She remembered James's words in the rain, "With time, with everything I have," and wondered if this was what he'd meant. One night, alone in her room, Melissa opened her phone. The chat with Nathan, no James, had been silent since that night in the car. Her thumb hovered, then typed, "I haven't forgiven you completely, but I'm not angry anymore." She hit send, her heart pounding. Seconds later, his reply came, "That's more than I deserve. Thank you." The simplicity of it, the humility, stirred something in her. He wasn't pushing, wasn't demanding. He was waiting, just as he'd promised. 2 weeks later, they met at a small cafe across town, far from Maple Hill's memories. James wore a simple gray sweater, his posture relaxed, but his eyes cautious, as if afraid to break the fragile truce. Melissa's smile was hesitant but real, her guard softening in the neutral space. They talked about safe things, books, music, the crisp autumn air, before the conversation deepened. "I got a scholarship," she said, watching his face. "It's changing everything." James nodded, his expression neutral, betraying nothing. "You deserve it," he said. And she believed him, though she didn't press for more. Their meetings grew frequent, slow steps towards something new. James never mentioned Nathan unless she did, letting her lead. He listened as she spoke of her first design classes, her voice alive with a passion she'd thought buried. She began to see him again, not the CEO, not the liar, but the man who'd left antiseptic for her scratch, who'd defended her without seeking praise. Her anger faded, not gone but quieter, replaced by a cautious hope. Then came the exhibition. A local artist, impressed by her classwork, asked Melissa to design the interior for his gallery showcase. She poured her soul into it, every color and placement a piece of her vision for warmth and belonging. The night of the opening, the gallery glowed, its walls alive with art and her touch. Guests praised her work, reporters scribbled notes, and Melissa stood in the center, her heart soaring. She'd caught her dream, shaped it with her own hands. In the crowd, James watched, his presence unobtrusive but unmistakable. He clapped softly, his eyes shining with pride, not for himself, but for her. As the night wound down, he approached, his voice low. "You've made this place a home," he said, echoing his words from months ago. Melissa met his gaze, her smile unguarded for the first time. "Thank you," she said, and in that moment, the distance between them felt smaller, the wounds less raw. They left the gallery together, the night air cool against their skin. Neither spoke of the past, but the silence was lighter now, filled with possibility. Melissa's heart, once folded in pain, began to unfurl, and James, walking beside her, knew he'd wait as long as it took for her to trust again. A year after the gallery lights dimmed, Melissa stood barefoot in a garden she had crafted from dreams and determination. The air was rich with lavender and citrus, sunlight filtering through trellises draped in white blossoms. Wooden chairs curved gently around a petal-strewn pathway, each detail bearing her touch. Simple, elegant, intentional. This was no mere venue. It was her canvas, a once overgrown lot transformed into a sanctuary of beauty and calm. Her first major solo project, commissioned after the triumph of the gallery showcase, it was now the place where she and James would marry. The world had shifted since that rain-soaked night in the alley, and today, under a golden afternoon sky, it felt like it was finally aligning. Melissa adjusted the flowing white dress that clung lightly to her frame, its fabric catching the breeze. Her shoulders glowed bare under the sun, her chestnut hair loose in soft waves. In a quiet corner of the garden, Lily hugged her tightly, her voice a whisper. "Told you he was the real deal, Mel," Melissa laughed, wiping a tear before it could smudge her makeup. "You'll never let me forget it," she teased, her heart full. Even Mr. Dalton had come, his tie too tight for his thick neck, his usual gruffness softened. "You were always more than a server," he said, shaking James's hand. James smiled graciously. "She's more than I ever imagined, too." The music began, a gentle melody of strings, and Melissa stepped from behind a flowering archway. Her breath caught as her eyes found James, standing beneath a canopy of vines, his hands clasped, his navy suit tailored but unpretentious. His smile was quiet, impossibly full, and when their gazes locked, the world narrowed to just them. Each step down the aisle felt like a stitch mending a seam torn long ago. The distance wasn't long, but by the time she reached him, her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. James took her hands, his thumbs brushing her knuckles, his voice a whisper for her alone. "That receipt you wrote," he said, "was the ticket that brought me into your world." Melissa's lips curled into a soft smile. "And today," she replied, "that world belongs to both of us." Their vows were brief, unscripted, and raw. James spoke first, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "I promise to earn my seat at your table, always, to listen more than I speak, to remember every Tuesday, and to never hide again." Melissa squeezed his hands, her voice breaking just slightly. "I promise to believe in us, to forgive without forgetting, to laugh through hard days, and to always save you a seat. In my heart, everywhere." The officiant's pronouncement, husband and wife, unleashed a wave of joyful applause. But for Melissa and James, it was background noise. They stood in a moment that felt like the culmination of every wound, every raindrop, every quiet gesture that had led them here. Their kiss was gentle, a seal on a promise forged through time and truth. The celebration unfolded under string lights, long tables laden with family-style dishes, laughter rising with every toast. Someone, Lily, no doubt, had found the receipt from that fateful Tuesday, Melissa's handwriting still clear. "You make this place warmer." Framed in glass, it sat at the center of their table, a relic of their beginning. James laughed when he saw it, his eyes crinkling. Melissa leaned over, kissing his cheek. "It aged well," she said, and the crowd chuckled, unaware of the weight those words carried. They danced without choreography, swaying to a soft ballad, their movements natural, unpressured. Melissa's head rested against James's chest, his heartbeat a steady rhythm beneath her ear. The garden glowed, stars blinking into the twilight, and for the first time Melissa felt not just seen, but held. Not just loved, but safe. Later, as guests drifted toward dessert, James pulled her aside, back to the archway, where they'd vowed their forever. He wrapped his arms around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. "You still warm the world," he whispered, his voice thick. "And you," Melissa replied, her eyes shining, "make mine feel safe." They kissed again, slow and knowing, the weight of their journey settling into something solid, unbreakable. The night wound down, but the garden's magic lingered. As they walked hand in hand toward their car, Melissa glanced back at the lights, the flowers, the space she'd built from nothing. This was her triumph. Not just the wedding, but the life she'd reclaimed. James had been part of it, not as a savior, but as a partner. His silent actions, scholarships, repairs, unwavering patience, proof of a love that didn't demand but simply gave. Back at their apartment, Melissa found a surprise on the kitchen table. A folded receipt, blank except for one line in James's neat handwriting. "Still crushing on you. Marry me." Tears sprang to her eyes, laughter bubbling up. She turned to find him leaning against the doorway, hands in his pockets, hope flickering in his gaze. She ran to him, her arms wrapping around him, her joy saying what words couldn't. The past, Nathan, the lies, the rain, was behind them. The future was theirs, a canvas waiting for their touch. As they stood together, the city humming beyond their windows, Melissa knew this was love in its truest form. Not perfect, but real, built on courage, forgiveness, and a single sentence scrawled in hope. The receipt, now tucked into her sketchbook beside that old napkin, was more than a memento. It was their promise, their proof that even the smallest moments could lead to the greatest chapters of a life. As Melissa and James's story fades into the golden glow of their garden, we're left with a reminder that love, though imperfect, can bloom from the smallest acts of courage. What did their journey stir in you? Did a moment resonate, or perhaps remind you of your own tale of trust and second chances? Share your thoughts in the comments or drop us a message. We'd love to hear your reflections and where you're listening from. Thank you for joining us on this heartfelt ride, for letting these stories warm your soul. Until next time, keep believing in the magic of honest words and new beginnings. We'll meet again soon with another tale to inspire and uplift. Stay connected and take care.